They picnicked on a small pink strand. He ate very little, and afterwards he walked off. She thought to follow him, then didn't. The children waited to see on a long whitened log, and one of the women read everybody's hand. She was promised an illness. When he returned, he gave his large yellowish hand reluctantly. He was promised a son. She looked at him for a gratifying sign, but got none. At that moment, he was telling one of the men about a black sloop that he had loved as a child. She thought, what is it that he sees in me? He who loves sea, sloops, jokes, masquerades, and deferment? What is that he sees in me who loves none of those things? Her instructor brought flat white boards. He held one end, she the other. She washed his hands carefully. They were very white from being in water. She lay on her stomach and held the boards and washed his hands in case they should let go of the board. The boards kept bobbing about and adding to her uncertainty. He said a rope would be better. The big fish had had its bone removed and was then pieced together. A perfect decoy. Its head and its two near eyes were gone. On her advice, the housekeeper had taken the lemons out of the refrigerator so that they were like lemons now rather than bits of frozen sponge. Someone remarked on this and she felt childishly pleased. Because of a south wind, the strange night exhilaration arose. They drank a lot. They discussed beautiful evenings, evenings resurrected in them by the wine and the wind and a transient goodwill. One talked of watching golden-cocked pheasants strutting in a backyard. One talked of bantams perched on a gate at dusk, their forms like notes of music on a blank bar. No one mentioned love or family. It was a scenery or nature or a whippet that left them with the best and most serene memories. She relived a stormy night with an ass braying in a field and a blown bough falling across a road. After dinner, various couples went for walks or swims or to listen for children. The three men who were single went to the village to reconnoitre. Women confided the diets they were on, or the face creams that they found most beneficial. A divorcee said to her host, "You've got to come to bed with me. You've simply got to." And he smiled. It was no more than a pleasantry, another remark in a strange night's proceedings where there were also crickets, tree frogs, and the sound of clandestine kissing. The single man came back presently and reported that the only bar was full of Germans and that whiskey was inferior. The one who had been most scornful about her swimming sat at her feet and said how awfully pretty she was. Asked her details about her life, her work, her schooling. Yet this friendliness only reinforced her view of her own solitude, her apartness. She answered each question carefully and seriously. By answering, she was subscribing to her longing to fit in. He seemed a little jealous, so she got up and went to him. He was not really one of them either. He simply stage managed them for his own amusement. Away from them, she almost reached him. It was as if he were bound by a knot that maybe she could unravel for a long stretch, living their own life, cultivating a true emotion, independent of other people. But would they ever be away? She dared not ask. For that kind of discussion, she had to substitute with a silence. She stole into their rooms to find clues to their private selves, to see if they had brought a sticking plaster, indigestion pills, face flannels, the ordinary necessities. On a dressing table there was a wig block and with blonde hair very artfully curled. On the face of the block-colored sequins were arranged to represent the features of an ancient Egyptian queen. The divorcee had a baby's pillow in a yellow muslin case. Some had carried up bottles of wine, and these, though not drunk, were not removed. The servants only touched that was thrown on the floor or put it in the basket paper waste paper baskets. Clothes for washing were thrown on the floor. It was one of the house rules, like having cocktails on the terrace at evening time. Some had written cards which she read eagerly. These cards told nothing except that it was all super. His secretary, who was mousy, avoided her. Perhaps she knew too much. Plans he had made for her future. She wrote to her doctor, I'm taking the tranquilizer, but I don't feel any more relaxed. Could you send me some others? She tore it up. Her hair got tangled by the salt in the sea air. She bought some curling tongues. One woman, who was pregnant, kept sprinkling baby powder and smoothing it over her stomach throughout the day. They always took tea together. They were friends, she thought. If this woman were not pregnant, would she be so amiable? That kind of thinking was beginning to take root in her. The instructor put a rope over her head. She brought it down around her middle. They heard the quack quack. She was certain that the plastic dog had intoned. She laughed as she adjusted the noose. The instructor laughed too. He held the firm grip of the rope. She threshed through the water and tried not to think of where she was. Sometimes she did it well. Sometimes she had to be brought in like an old piece of lumber. She could never tell the outcome of each plunge. She never knew how it was going to be or what thoughts would suddenly obstruct her. But each time he said, lovely, lovely, and in his exuberance she found consolation. A woman called Iris swam out to their yacht. She dangled in the water with one grip and with one hand gripped the sides of the boat. Her nail varnish was exquisitely applied and the nails had the glow of a rich imbued pearl. By contrast with the pearl coating, the half moons were chastely white. Her personality was like that too, full of glow. For each separate face she had a smile, and a word or two for those she already knew. One of the men asked if she was in love. Love! She riled him. She said her good spirits were due to her breeding. She said life was a question of correct breeding. She had come to invite him for drinks, but he declined because they were due back at the house. His lawyer had been invited to lunch. She chided him for being so busy, then swam off toward the shore where her poodle was yapping and waiting for her. At lunch, they all talked about her. There was mention of her past escapades, the rows with her husband, his death, which was thought to be a suicide, and the unpleasant business with his burial, which proved impossible on religious grounds. Finally, his body had to be laid in a small paddock adjoining the public cemetery. Altogether, an unsavory story. Yet, brimming in the water had been this radiant woman with no traces of past harm. Yes, Iris has incredible willpower. Incredible, he said. For what? She asked from the opposite end of the table. For living, he said tartly. He was not lost on the others. Her jaw muscle twitched. Again she spoke to herself, remonstrated with her heart. I try. I want to fit. I want to join. Be the someone who sleeps in a crowd of marchers when the march has already begun. But there is something in me that I call sense and it backs at your ways. It would seem as if I am here simply to smart under your strictures, retreating into dreams and monologue. She posed for a picture. She posed beside the sculptured lady. She repeated the pose of the lady, hands placed over each other and laid on the left shoulder, head inclining towards those hands. He took it. Click, click. The marble lady had been the sculptor's wife and had died tragically. The hands with their unnatural long nails were the best feature of it. Click, click. When she was not looking, he took another. She found the account books in a desk drawer and was surprised at the entries. Things like milk and matches had to be accounted for, she thought. Is he generous at the roots? The housekeeper had left some needlework in the book. She had old-fashioned habits and resisted much of the modern kitchen equipment. She kept the milk in little pots, with muslin spread over the top. She skimmed the cream with her fat fingers, tipped the cream into small jugs for their morning coffee. What would they say to that? In the evenings, when every task was done, the housekeeper sat in the back veranda with her husband doing the mending. They had laid pine branches on the roof, and these had withered and were tough as wire. Her husband made shades from soft pieces of new white wood, and then, in the dark, put his penknife aside and caroused with his wife. She heard them when she stole in to get some figs from the refrigerator. It was both poignant and untoward. The instructor let go of the rope. She panicked and stopped using her arms and legs. The water was rising up over her. The water engulfed her. She knew that she was screaming convulsively. He had to jump in, clothes and all. Afterward, they sat in the dining room with a blanket each and drank brandy. They vowed to tell no one. The brandy went straight to his head. He said in England it would be raining and people would be queuing for buses, and his eye twinkled because of his own good fortune at being abroad. More than one guest was called Teddy. One of the Teddys told her that in the morning before his wife wakened, he read Proust in the dressing room. It enabled him to masturbate. It was no more than if he had told her he missed bacon for breakfast. For breakfast, there was fruit and scrambled egg. Bacon was a rarity in the island. She said to the older children that the plastic dog was psychic and had squeaked. They laughed. The laughing was real, but they kept it up long after the joke had expired. A girl said, "Shall I tell you the story?" The boys appeared to want to restrain her. The girl said, "Once upon a time, there was a lady and a blind man came to her door every evening for sixpence, and one day she was in the bath and the doorbell rang and she put on a gown and came down and it was the milkman. And then she got back in the bath and the doorbell rang and it was the breadman. And at 6 o'clock the doorbell rang and she thought, I don't have to put on my gown if it is the blind man. And when she opened the door, the blind man said, Madam, I've come to tell you I got my sight back." And the laughter that had never really died down started again and echoed. No insect, no singing bird was heard on that walk. She had to watch the time. The children's evening meal was earlier. They ate on the back veranda, and she often went there and stole an anchovy or a piece of bread so as to avoid getting too drunk before dinner. There was no telling how late dinner would be. It depended on him, on whether he was bored or not. Extra guests from neighboring houses came each evening for drinks. They added variety. The talk was about sailing and speeding, or about gardens, or about pools. They all seemed to be intrigued by these topics, even the women. One man who followed the snow knew that their best snow surfaces were for every week of the year. That subject did not bore her as much. At least the snow was nice to think about, crisp and blue, like he said, and rasping under the skis. The children could be often heard shrieking, but after cocktail hour they never appeared. She believed that it would be better once they were married and had children. She would be accepted by the courtesy of them. It was a swindle, really. The fact that the small creatures, ridiculously easy to beget, should solidify a relationship, but they would. Everybody hinted how he wanted a son. He was nearing 60. She had stopped using contraceptives and he had stopped asking. Perhaps this was his way of deciding or finally accepting her.